Welcome back. I am your host, Jacob Harris. This is another episode, 130, I believe. And this podcast is brought to you by Achievement Apex and PowerPit Rockingham, as well as Supplement Mart Rockingham, PED Test Australia, and Bulk Gym Chalk. Throughout this podcast, I'm going to be consuming some fantastic thirst trap Australian spring water. All right, that's enough from the sponsored side of things. I am joined today. I'm so nervous to say this. Jared Fedeke. I've screwed it up, haven't I?
No, that's how we actually say it. The Hungarian way is Fekete.
Fekete. That was the oh man, I had it so perfect in my head, and then I damn it. All right, we've got both now. So whichever way, whichever way you want to say it. Man, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's for me, we just mentioned this before. There's a lot of time between us. You're in Michigan, so you're 13 hours behind. And we were just kind of discussing a little bit about where you were or where you've been and where you are. I'd kind of like to hear a little bit about maybe not necessarily childhood, but you obviously grew up in Michigan. So you could tell us a little bit about what your experience what your experience was like as a teenager, and maybe when you got into any kind of strength training or wrestling.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Northern Michigan is a unique place. It's Sleeping Bear National Lake Shore. So you got the pinky side of the mitten. If you look at the map, you look at Michigan. We're up north, not too far from Canada. So it gets pretty cold. We get a lot of lake effect snow in the wintertime. But it's also a very beautiful area. So I like to just throw that out there for those travelers out there. If you're ever looking at coming to a cool part of the country, we got the Sleeping Bear Dunes all along the lakeshore. And then that's where I get my jujitsu company from, is Sleeping Bear Ju Jitsu. And Northern Michigan is just kind of like a unique, a lot of farmland. There's one city nearby, Traverse City is kind of a cool little place. National Cherry Festival runs there and stuff like that. So, yep, I grew up here all the way through 18. I mean, came back for all the summers and stuff like that, and really started getting into strength training and wrestling and athletics and stuff like that when I was young. But my dad got me onto the wrestling mats when I was probably about 6 years old. So, he was always coaching at the high school here, and so I was just around the sport a lot, and just got a lot of exposure to it. So, kind of my fortune was that my dad was involved. Small town school, so it wasn't anything. It was no sort of powerhouse or like these crazy programs that you see sort of like downstate and stuff like that. But I think that kind of served me as I was growing up. I wasn't really burnt out. That's one big thing about this sport, or at least wrestling, is you can get burnt out pretty easily. As a kid, it's a very emotional sport. So, I see that now as a coach, coaching the same high school that I went through now. And, I just see a lot of the emotions and stuff that these teenagers have to deal with, ups, downs. It's like inevitable. And they're very hard on themselves because it's um, very tough sport, to say put it like that. So I did that all the way through high school. Got into lifting though when I was probably like a sophomore, so like 10th grade here. It's like I'm like 16, 17, 18 years old. I remember taking my first 5 grams of creatine, and that being like a big deal and like actually being effective. And then once I kind of got into that side of things, I started to like put it together and realize like I could keep going with this in college and whatnot. So, um, yeah, that was kind of like my intro and like my upbringing up in Michigan.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a heavy level of interest, at least I know from some of the Australian listeners, because we grow up watching a lot of American movies. And I think once we get into fitness or training, we tend to follow a lot of American lifters and stuff. It wasn't as big here, at least in my experience anyway. I used to watch a lot of like YouTube and stuff like that as well. And I was always really interested in the fact that you guys have a lot of it in schools because we have none of it here. And when I say none of it, I mean none of it. I mean like the
Mm.
only sports we're playing is I don't know if you're familiar with like AFL, but it's like it's just like football or that's it. Like when there might be a bit of rugby or something like that, and it's all kind of that sort of sport. I don't think there's any kind of even hint of like lifting weights. I don't know if there's any schools even in Australia that do that, and certainly not wrestling or anything like that. So the school that maybe you went to and the one that you said you're working at now, what's the integration of things like wrestling and strength training? Like how young are you guys doing it?
Yeah, yeah. First off, I think I blame the Queen here on Australia being so far behind.
Yeah,
It's got to be her fault, right? And then for us, like in America, it's like it's really part of the culture. I don't know really why. Midwestern culture, like specifically, you have like a almost like a group of a ring of states around Michigan that are predominantly like the powerhouse states for producing these. I mean, really, they're like corn-fed, sort of like just hard-nosed wrestlers. And I mean, my theory is that they deal with the toughest winners, and they deal with it by beating up other men all winter. And a lot of them do come from farms and like eat good food, and it's kind of tough. But there's also a good plethora that like are pulled from like the inner cities and stuff like that too, that kind of just get rolling with these like club teams and whatnot. And so, yeah, for whatever reason, the culture of um, the Midwest of the United States is really just based in wrestling. It's pretty wild, and how that happened and like just kind of like the history of that is like it's pretty cool. It's a cool history. It's one that I kind of just like observed and kind of like pick up here and there, but it's so rich. Like I still learn things today. Like, going to the US Open and meeting new people. It's such a giant community, but it's also such a small world too. So it's like everybody kind of knows everybody in a sense. But it's just like it's a wild world too. Like it's wrestling is just like just fight. I mean, it's a lot like jujitsu. It's a lot like jujitsu in that sense, where it's just like a combat sport. And but yeah, it's very much something that the United States is like embraced as like their own for sure. Russia's another one that I would say is a lot like that. It seems like on the international stage, but yeah. And then some of these Middle Eastern, like Iran and stuff like that, kind of get big into it as well.
yeah. I think maybe it's somewhat more expected, at least from our perspective as well, in somewhere like Russia or Iran. We're kind of like, oh, well, those guys do crazy. We're Americans. There's more for us to relate to, I think, just for a few reasons. Uh, but I yeah. So I'm curious though, like so specifically with your school as an example, is there like a year level that you or can you know what I mean, like where wrestling becomes a thing, or can you choose it as a subject?
Right, right, right. Yeah, no, I guess I see where you're coming from. It's honestly something that is school dependent, so you're area dependent, and most areas have something. If you're near a metroplex and you're near a suburban area, you're going to have clubs that you can get access to, sort of like jujitsu. But then each school, like generally each school has wrestling. Not all schools do. A lot do though. And right now, women's wrestling is actually like on the rise. So most schools don't have women's wrestling, but it's growing like almost exponentially now. Every year, there's more and more girls um, wrestling teams, and girls are joining the wrestling teams and having their own. They're getting more training partners, and it's like more of like an actual like a girls sport, where it's always been that way for guys, where it's like you can start in middle school and the school has a middle school team, and whoever like ends up heading up those programs in those schools, like for instance ours, like we know as coaching staff, like we kind of have to have each level of development, so we put coaches down with like the kids to develop the kids, and then you have coaches in the middle school, so you got the teenagers and stuff like that, and then by the time they get to the high school, they're fully developed, and that's where that's what like kind of an efficiently run program has, but that takes years. I mean, our program's been going for over 25, 30 years, so it takes a long time to kind of like build that up.
Yeah, okay. So people can. be in there as early as middle school. And middle school's like for you guys, what are you like 12, 13?
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's full and there'll be full gyms there in the gymnasium as well, right? So you guys can like bench press and stuff like it. When are people doing that? Are they do that? Are you guys doing that like in gym class, or is that like something that you do in your own time during lunch and things like that?
Yeah, extracurricular for sure. I mean, it's just our schools will have two or three sports you can do each season. So we have like, soccer and football in the fall, like real football. So we, call it soccer,
Yeah.
but soccer and football, and then cross country in the fall. And then in the wintertime, you got basketball, wrestling you can choose from. And then in the spring, like golf and baseball and track and stuff like that. So wrestling's a winter sport for us, which I think is a really good time period for it because especially where we live with the rough winters and stuff like that, it's a good way just to grind through it. Um, I've always found that was like pretty positive. These winters can get pretty tough. And yeah, so I mean, gym class and stuff like that, like definitely some demonstrations is like, would go on more so for us because our wrestling coach was the gym teacher. So he'd be kind of like recruiting people. But I think probably differs per school, experience.
So is there like a side of it with you where like if you're coaching, kids and wrestling and things like that, it's do you encourage them to lift weights, or is it something you do within the class?
Yeah, so we'll have like separate lifts and stuff like that. So incorporated into our program, and that was big in college too, where we would have like 6 a.m. morning lifts and stuff like that. I mean, weightlifting's I mean, if you're not weightlifting, if you're not lifting for wrestling or lifting for jujitsu, it's you're doing something wrong. Like strength is a huge advantage, but it's specific strength. It's like how strong can your grip be? How stable can your core be in these dynamic positions, and can you neck bridge and back bridge, and hold a back bridge. Can your neck withstand your body, weight? Can you hand walk, stuff like that. Like a little more dynamic stuff. Like you'll see some pretty wild um, types of lifts for wrestling specifically. But yeah, I mean, we definitely our program, which we're a pretty successful program now at this point. It's like our culture has really come a long way, and it's like we definitely incorporate those morning lifts, and then we get the wrestling in the afternoon.
Yeah, very interesting. So I know that you train quite a bit, and it's it's weird, right? Because of what you just said. Then, if you're not lifting for jujitsu, where I go at the moment, it's not that people don't. Maybe they do in some of their time. Uh, to be honest, they don't really. I know a lot of people that do it that seem to do next to no strength training, and a lot of the time their reaction, or I'm not going to call it an excuse, but a lot of the time it'll be something like, I don't want to take away from the jujitsu that I'm doing. Like I want to do more jujitsu, and lifting weights is like, who cares, sort of thing. Like as much, you know what I mean? Like it's very different from what you're saying. So like, how you've obviously done a fair bit of it, and also you look like you do, because that's the other thing I'll notice as well. Like especially just Americans in general, but even yourself, a lot kind of like these thicker physiques. I know a lot of people who are bigger and then they lift like that as well. But a lot of the people I know in some of these places um, are smaller guys, right? They're like skinnier guys. And maybe that has its advantage. But what's your perspective on that in general? And like you obviously think it's valuable yourself. So like how much of an emphasis do you put on it in your training?
Yeah, yeah. Some do, some don't. I think that the mentality of just like I don't really have time for it, or like it'll take away from my jujitsu. Like I get that if jujitsu is sort of like your hobby, and I get it if jujitsu is sort of like something that keeps you well rounded and just sort of something you use as like a sharpening tool and like all these other areas of life and stuff. For me, like it's my job. Like that's how I treat it. So it's very much like strength has always been an advantage that sticks out in my mind is like it's not the ultimate thing, but you can really make a difference with your strength if you apply it specifically. And so I've just been lucky enough to be around coaches and training partners that really understand that. Um, And so I've just really bought into the idea of using specific strength to make my jiu-jitsu better, and it really does. I mean, I think I think the way that I train is like it helps me. It shows me like where I'm evolving to. Like I can see my weight going up. I can see, you know, it's good for me to see the progression. But then when I get to jujitsu, when I get to these roles, it's like a whole new me getting to step out there, and I get to surprise myself a little bit more. I get to because I'm gonna show up the same. I'm still gonna flow with everybody. I'm still gonna respect everybody, and I'm just like gonna just kind of go with things. And so like, you know, the stronger my base gets built and the stronger, you know, I'm feeling, the more explosive I'm feeling, you know, it just new things come out, you know, and I get to roll in a different way every time, it seems like. So that's where like strength kind of like comes in play for me, where it's like part of that is also managing and mitigating, you know, injuries, and really taking care of yourself and focusing on mobility and doing the right things off, so that like these you know, heavy strength training sessions and stuff like that don't weigh on you. So like I think I've got a pretty good system down for building in recovery time, and like building in you know, what I need to be able to like essentially sustain the growth. Um, but for me, it's sort of like my strategy for taking over the world. So
Yeah. So I guess maybe to summarize that, what would you say are maybe some core like 3 or 4 exercises that seem to be like a staple in your program for, I guess, wrestling or jiu-jitsu? I think a lot of what I've seen in the past, at least, is that people spend less time on maybe something like a heavy deadlifts, and generally opt for something like a power clean or something if they're doing like NFL or wrestling or something, because there seems to be more of a transfer with you know, explosiveness. But what are your sort of 3 or 4 staples? And then maybe when you mentioned recovery, ice baths and stuff are a huge thing at the moment, and people are doing them here. Maybe you could just touch on what you do for recovery.
yeah, absolutely. Staples. So right now my lifting split is really just like a strong, like a hard leg day, hard back day, back bicep pull day, and a push day. It's pretty simple. Um, and then we'll go a day rest, and then hit kind of like reset. Um, so for legs, we call them a pit boss, but it's like a platform that you strap the belt so it pulls like kind of like pulls right down at your taint. So it's like essentially just pulls straight down. I don't know what you guys would call that, but yeah, you step up on a platform, you link up the chain from the bottom kind of up to your right to your belly button. And then it's pulling like right down at your sort of like belly button core area.
Belt
So that's like,
belt squat.
yeah, belt squat. Yeah, so we're doing a lot of those essentially. Like, um, if we're doing squats, front squats or back squats, we're essentially coming to a full stop, and just like making sure there's no injuries or anything. Like, just trying to just mitigate a lot of that. Chance risk for injury there. And me personally, like I focus on adductor stuff. I have some psoas issues and stuff like that, so I've been really focusing on, you know, squeezing and stuff like that. I would say one little sort of tip or trick for jujitsu, I would say, is it's like getting these little fat grips that you can put on any sort of like lat pull or something like that. You can put them on dumbbells and stuff like that. But essentially, me, uh, a big difference in my jiu-jitsu strength has been like focusing on my grip strength, and then for squatting, my toes. So I want to like push my toes apart and essentially like really focus on my like rooting myself into the ground and just really focusing on my toes, getting deep into my feet, and like really feeling my feet spread. And that's the same thing when it goes with the grip. So I'm really focusing on getting my fingers together and focusing on the squeeze of my fingers, and not so much on the lat and stuff like that. So it ends up working your forearms a lot more so like intimately, like you just get like a lot more connection there. And so like I think making those changes in the last year, I've seen a lot of progression and strength that way, and just like the way I feel and stuff like that. So I would say those fat grips, and then doing some of that belt squats and stuff like that have been really big for me. Um, Other than that, I've been really anything too special. Like I stick to it pretty much like sets of 10, working sets all the way up to like top set, sort of just like I'll go back down and blow it out, or sets of 20, 25, whatever I can get, and just sort of to failure. Um, 5, 6, 7 exercises in the morning on each, just trying to hit different angles and stuff like that. So it's pretty basic stuff, but like fortunately for me, I have a training partner who's like really nerdy about it all, and he's also a very good coach. So I've just been really fortunate to get some really good training in that way. And then as far as recovery and in between stuff, it's just always been I'm really dialed in with my diet, disciplined with my diet. I'm pretty much, I would say, like animal based. Not Liver King, but like kind of close. Like I'm really big into the organ meats and stuff like that. I think that those are pretty awesome. I do all the foam rolling, sort of like massage balls, stuff like that. I try to take care of my body that way. Ice baths, yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of the cold, especially up here. You can get a lot of it right now. The lakes are just kind of like unthawing and stuff like that. So that's a game changer. I will say I've been kind of a pussy about it lately, but um, sort of as the spring comes back online, like I think I'll like, jump into the water a little bit more. Um, Nothing too special. Like I think all the basic stuff is like I think you need to be hitting like if you don't have red light access to red light therapy or something like that, you need to be getting sunshine in the morning. Like I'm a big believer in like grounding. You got to go out and touch the ground for a little bit of time. You got to focus on your breath work. Got a little bit of like a breath work practice that I do, like Wim Hof style. I think all that stuff's really really big for kind of keeping your mind sort of calmer and stuff like that. And then I track my sleep really closely. So I generally have a pretty good idea of how tuned in I am with like my HRV or my heart rate variability and stuff like that. So I have a pretty good lock on like when I can go really hard and when I can't, and when I need to recover and stuff like that. I think that's all pretty important for just kind of like staying well rounded.
Yeah, interesting. It's always the basics sort of stuff. It's always good to hear that, and it's nothing too kind of, I guess, out there or pseudosciencey. It's sort of just the general stuff. I'm pretty the same with eating, man. I'm interested in terms of when you say animal based, because the only thing I find that is really common in jiu-jitsu as well is people are super like, especially here or just even contact sports or combat sports rather, but contact sports as well, to be honest. I think just in general, people in sports, like it seems to be like there's a large percentage of people that like don't realize the importance of something like carbohydrates. Like people will kind of constantly try to be on, I've had like people who want to be like athletes or just say it's even just random people that are saying like, oh, should I just do like carnivore or like should I just eat meat and eggs and stuff? And I'm like, you should definitely like that should definitely be the base of your diet, but I'd probably never give you the advice to avoid them. I feel like that would definitely have to be a personal choice, but like you kind of only mentioned that. So like, do you still have like a large carbohydrate intake at all?
Yeah, I actually love that you asked this question because like I'm kind of addicted to honey. Like I eat so much. I had like a 12-pound bucket that I just finished in like the last month, and like I just it's the bear in me. Like I don't know. I just fucking love honey. And so I put honey on all my fruit, and so like a ton of fruit when I can, like bananas, apples, strawberries. I try to stick with what's in season. So like right now it hasn't really been too good, but like um, actually during the winter time because there hasn't been a lot in season, I've really kind of like accepted potatoes and rice. It's like another form. I do well with it. A lot of the original like idea and like motivation behind doing it was just sort of like eliminating um, kind of like excess water in my system, but also like immune system, just like autoimmune stuff that I was just kind of like concerned with. And I think making the switch to just fruit as a source of carbohydrate was really helpful for me. It was probably about 2 years ago now that I did it. I mean, I like leaned up. I dropped some excess water, and I felt great. And I think the longer I did it, I realized like you got to be a little bit careful with it. Like, and you got to kind of be open to maybe some other sources that like you can handle. Like obviously I'm not an advocate for like white bread or anything like that, but you know, lately I've been playing with potatoes and stuff like that, and it's just more calories. I do well with them. They're tasty, so I have zero issue with them. But ideally, I think you're getting like really good fruit from like, but not just like good fruit. Like you're getting fruit that wasn't sprayed. You're getting fruit that was grown in like pretty healthy soil and stuff like that, which is just like kind of hard to come by, to be honest. So like, just gotta go with it the best you can. But um, the honey is like I think the secret sauce. You really got to get the raw honey into your diet.
Yeah, man, I'm really glad you said that because I'm huge for it. Like I find it to be just like the best source of something like before I work out. Like I just because it's so simple as well. Like I've even literally times where I've just had a teaspoon of it, like or something like that of honey before I've trained, and that's enough to fuel the workout, which would have just seemed insane to me a long time ago. I would have thought I used to had to eat everything I could, which would just lead to a lot of digestion issues, and I'd feel lethargic. So you learn as you go, I think, but especially with what you're doing as well. I imagine wrestling in BJJ, it's even more important. You definitely don't want a stomach full of oatmeal or something, and then people are leaning on you. And yeah, so I kind of want to, and I want to come back to the jujitsu and wrestling stuff because I want to kind of explore what you're going to do with that personally. But we mentioned a few things beforehand, and I really kind of want to hear about it. How old are you right now?
I'm 29.
29. So you've had some time, or you were in the Marine Corps. I'd like to kind of hear about what age you did that and why you decided to do that, and then maybe about your experience.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I joined in 2019. I would have been yeah 24, I think. Yeah, 24 years old, 25 years old. Um, got into officer candidate school. Took a little while after college to figure out how to get them to give me a waiver. I had a torn pec wrestling in college and stuff like that. So it was like took a little bit longer than I wanted it to. So, ideally I would have joined right after college. But the idea was, I needed to figure out a way to continue to train and get paid for it, essentially. And, I had the idea too to serve and some ideas there that like I was going to do something bigger than myself and stuff like that, which I've since become a little bit jaded towards like all of that. But um, there's a lot of good that I can take away from it. There's also just a lot of stuff that I can eventually want to like kind of shed light on. That's this sort of like the abusive side of the organization. But I eventually got the waiver for my pec tear, and I made it to OCS in the summer of 2019. Became a second lieutenant in August, and then I had about 9 months of officer training at in Quantico, Washington D.C. area, and got out of that. Got my military occupational specialty. My job was a combat engineer, so I was off to engineer school, North Carolina. So that's Camp Lejeune. It's right on the East Coast. So I go down there, which was perfect because in my head I knew about the all Marine wrestling team. They were pretty established at the time. Had a couple guys that were doing pretty well. It's actually where I met my one of my best friends and training partners now, Denzel Freeman, who fights for the PFL. He's the third best guy in the U.S. for heavyweight Greco-Roman wrestling. So he's like going to the Olympic trials and all this stuff. So um, that's when I met him was when I was going through officer candidate school and the basic school because I knew he was kind of going the same route, trying to get on the wrestling team. And so essentially, I just had it in my mind I was going to be a wrestler. I'll do all this stuff. I was doing my best. I had like a backup plan to maybe try to go, special operations, something like that. If like not, and none of this panned out, so I was kind of like paving my way a little bit. But getting orders to go be an engineer was perfect because the wrestling team was set up on New River Air Station, which is right next to Camp Lejeune. So I ended up actually buying a house 10 minutes away from New River And so I was like super close to the wrestling team and just set up for the next like 6 months going through school and getting to my new unit and stuff like that. So like anytime they had like an opportunity to come and wrestle and stuff like that, I'd show up. Downside was at that time, COVID hits, and I was just getting in. I was starting to like meet new people on the team. A couple guys from the Naval Academy, captains and stuff like that were like starting to accept me as like someone who was like a legitimate candidate for the wrestling team. I was like meeting the coach, and so like everything was going good. Um, and then COVID hits, and pretty much all I could do is like underground jujitsu during that time. It's just like getting with people and stuff like that. And like the military was, I think the civilian world was like pretty weird in a lot of different ways. Like the military was just unique weird about it. They just had like I feel like I got a taste of both, just like being able to see what's going on out in the world, and then like on base, it was just like nothing made sense. Okay, it just was like complete chaos. Like everybody just went insane, And so during that time, it was just like, yeah, I was just like trying to stay afloat, doing jujitsu and my job and stuff like that. I got through a lot of that stuff, and kind of turned out that the wrestling team was sort of disbanding. So as this disbandment was going on, just kind of kept training. I bring up Denzel Freeman again. Like me and him just kept training. Like he was training for MMA, I was training for jujitsu, and we would wrestle on the side and stuff like that just to supplement. And so we just kept going, and we got some opportunities to go and wrestle. Um, kind of on our own dime a couple times, and so we went and we took those opportunities. But we were representing the Marine Corps, and so those kind of paid off a few times. And then, um, by the end of it, that last year, we were getting invited to go wrestle for the Navy as a part of the Marine Corps. So the Navy still had their team, and we were getting orders to go and wrestle for the Navy, go to the U.S. Open, go to the Armed Forces Championship, and just go and get these training opportunities. So that was really cool. It was nice to actually be like paid to do that, and like that was my full-time job, and that's like kind of where I was thriving. So, you know, I'm not salty about it. Like I eventually like it ended up working out, but I was already pretty much sold on, kind of getting out of the Marine Corps, because of the way that kind of like COVID went down, the vaccine situation went down and all that stuff. So like I was pretty much at war with the Marine Corps for the last 2 years. And I ended up winning, my illegal cases and stuff like that. And I ended up getting out of the Marine Corps without getting vaccinated, which was for me pretty cool thing because it fucked up a lot of people that I knew. And there's no real like that's not really like a political statement. I just like for me personally, it was just something that I didn't want to touch. I was worried about, I already have like I'm like kind of like a active person, and I was seeing a lot of stuff going on with people's hearts and stuff like that. So I kind of like was really put off by it. So I ended up fighting it, and I got kind of like reprimanded for that. And so I was kind of like, it's kind of abusive. So I ended up kind of choosing to um, separate myself from the Marine Corps and get myself prepared to leave. And so I left around this time last year. I was on my way out, and um, started a program called Skill Bridge where they essentially just take some college classes. I got to move home, and for the last like 5 months of my contract, I was getting paid to take courses online, and I started a jujitsu business. I started teaching jujitsu.
Yeah, okay. That's I mean, first of all, I'll say not that it's a larger discussion that we can have because it's one no one really wants to hear for the most part, but I respect the way you handle things. I don't know if you know too much about the way things that happen here, or I'm assuming there's like a version of it in America. We do something called FIFO over here. People work at like mine sites and stuff like that, and that was kind of another big thing. I'm assuming the Navy was the same, but it's not something I could speak for. But mine sites were the same. It was there was people who had multiple mortgages and were in high positions at mine sites that walked away because they refused to get vaccinated, and if they didn't, you would just get to work or at least where I was working, you just get to work one day and just try to scan into the gate, and you just like it would just not let you in, and you just be like stuck out the front, sort of thing. Like, and it's like sometimes even it would just be a screw. Even if you got vaccinated, like, and the computer system didn't update, you'd be like out there in the cold and shit because it like didn't go through. And at the time, I felt I had so my mum died, and I was in a pretty bad place, and I was like, I need to make a lot of money. I'm like, I need to just like go and work somewhere and just, you know. And it was the first thing I went to, and I don't like to regret things because things happen, but putting myself in that position meant that I was basically forced, like I guess a lot of people felt like they were, to get it. And so I got three of the vaccines. And like I said, we won't go on about it, but yeah, I've actually been the last couple of years, or at least the last maybe 12 months, been getting a lot of tests and things like that because I have had some issues with my heart. So it's an interesting one. So far, things seem to be okay though. Like everything I've done, it's like 99% my heart is like structurally okay and operating fine, but there's probably some kind of maybe minor condition there and stuff, and it could not be related. But it's one of those tough things where it is sort of a difficult situation, and I don't know too many people personally that were affected by it, but obviously you do, and like is a difficult time I think for people because there was a lot of weird vibes between people and kind of these arguments and discussions where ultimately I just felt like um, I don't know, it felt really weird. It felt like in a lot of times throughout society, we're able to kind of have our own opinions about things and make our own decisions, and we didn't feel maybe as separated, but there was something about COVID and the way everything went down in the situation where it just created like a really large gap between people, and it just seemed to be on a whole nother level of disagreement, I think, and things got kind of strange. And I know people that did the same thing, who they just went, no. I worked at a gym at the time, and I had there was like a client there, and she just went, look, I'm just going to go train at home, and I'll just come back when it's okay again. We were all like, oh, look, it's not going to be okay. You have to get it. Like, it's not just going to go away. And then, you know, 9 to 12 months later, they were like, oh, you know what? Actually, you don't have to have it now. And we were all like, oh,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
we feel silly for getting it now, something, but only because I think um, it that personal choice side of things. Some people I know who were just like, no, like I'm happy to get it. I think it'll be safer, rah rah, and then they did, and they had no problems, and like that's cool as well. But I think it's a shame that there was so much kind of negativity towards it, and people we weren't in a position where we could all kind of choose. There's a bit of a difficult discussion. So I'm sorry to hear that you had some friends that went through that, but I am glad to hear that you were able to stick up for what you believe in, and actually get through that.
yeah. Thank you. It was definitely weird, and nothing too crazy. Like I didn't have anybody have like crazy effects. Fortunately, on my side of things, what was really hard to witness was Marines. Like I had a lot of Marines under me at the time, and none of them want. Like I had a couple female Marines coming to me crying, like people that I have like direct authority over, like I could help out, and like in this situation, my hands were tied. Like I was just like, listen, I completely respect whatever decision that you decide to make. I'm not going to tell you to do this. I just don't feel it's right. But there are people higher than me that outrank me that are telling you that you have to do it. So it's just like it's up to you. It's just a choice you have to make, and you live with whatever the consequences are. Which I embody that. Like I like got a lot of respect for kind of standing up to it. Um, even my battalion commander, I know, kind of like couldn't really say it publicly, but he respected the decision as well, and it was just like he was a big mentor of mine, and so he just like it kind of looked bad on him, but he sort of shielded me from a lot of it. Like what ended up happening was I got taken off my deployment because they weren't going to let me deploy to Africa, which was sad because I trained with my Marines and I was really close with them. But in another sense, it really it really paid off for me because I ended up getting like a desk job, like 9 to 5. I was a training officer for the battalion, so we had like 1,500 Marines that I would essentially like do logistics, set up events, communicate, where and when people need to be places, be at those places, make sure those events run smoothly. These are things like swim training, rifle training, um, pistol training, gas chamber stuff, like all these things that I was making sure that all of our Marines were like adequately trained on each year, their yearly trainings. So that was my job for the last year and a half of the Marine Corps, and it really gave me the flexibility to go and do a lot of these competitions. So it wasn't just wrestling that I was going and wrestling for the Marine Corps. I was taking my own leave and going to Jiu Jitsu Con, and I was going to IBJJF Worlds, and I was going to, Fight to Win Charlotte, and all these things that are a little bit more like, this is how you build your resume in jiu-jitsu is you go and you get exposure and you meet people and you get on fight cards and you do all these things. So it's like, it worked out for me, fortunately, standing up for what I sort of was like believed in. And, you know, I'm, I'm grateful for that. I'm just like looking back now, it wasn't easy because it's like part of me did want to go on a deployment with my guys and stuff like that. But, yeah, it definitely was a weird time. It's definitely hard to see everybody kind of going through similar sort of like hardships. It's just like this massive mind fuck for everybody.
Yeah, it was a weird. I think it's, and people talked about it at the time. I think it's just for us. I'm 28, so we're the same age. But just the only time a lot of us had been through something that affected the whole world. Like it didn't matter where you were in the world. You were 13. You're 13 hours time difference between us, and we were both experiencing the same event, if you want to put it that way. Obviously differently, but yeah, we were well different here as well, man. Like they did like a massive shutdown here and stuff, and we were like, because we're already so isolated, it was like so different here as well. Like it was like we had like places like over in Melbourne that were like completely going on, and then here there was like nothing happening for ages. We had like one dude had it here, and then they shut down everything. It was, and then we were getting just paid to stay at home and stuff. So there was all these different weird. It was strange, man. It was definitely weird. Um, but one of the things that you mentioned, um, and just I guess even just talking about like the Marine Corps and all that sort of stuff, like once again, I've not done it, and I imagine the army or stuff like that is different here than it is over there. So for me and my perspective, I mean, we've just seen movies like Jarhead and the whole Sandcastle and all these like army movies and stuff, and like I just have to wonder about like the realism. But I know that you mentioned a lot about like rifle training and stuff. And so that's a massive difference between there and here, right? Here, I'm sure you're aware that like guns are like a no-go in Australia, right? They're incredibly hard to get. And even now, I think we've actually just recently had a law been brought in that if you have a gun license and you have guns, and I could be quoting this incorrectly, but you are actually only allowed to shoot those guns on certain, and this sort of makes sense to an extent, but I think it's like really strict. You're only allowed to go to like two or three specific places that allow you to shoot those guns. Like you can't, even if you own a property and stuff like that, you can't do anything there. And so people are kind of getting pretty upset about it.
Oh
Um,
yeah, as they should.
yeah, so sorry, that wasn't really a question there, but obviously you guys are big on like your freedom around guns. What's your experience with them? Obviously, when you did that in the Marine Corps, but are you someone who now like recreationally enjoys shooting and do you still do it?
No, so I don't personally. I mean, I do like guns. I think that they're cool. I am around them. I have my own. I think to an Australian, I'm probably into guns. I mean, but I just funny. Like while you're saying all that, I'm just thinking about. There's probably gonna be a few of my Marine Corps buddies that are listening to this, and it's just like I could just hear their minds just like, they're just like they cannot stand it. They're like that is it's fucked up. It is like it's like a very prideful thing over here that like we take our guns and like our ability to like our freedoms to have our guns so seriously. I think it's funny. Um, my buddies in the Marine Corps, a few of them got really into it, and it's definitely like a sport thing. Like I have a couple guys that essentially the way I train jiu-jitsu and the way that I train wrestling and martial arts and stuff like that is like that's how they I mean that they train in that way, but for like competition shooting, with pistols and um, rifles and whatnot. So it's a really cool world. I think it's a very niche thing, but a lot like jujitsu. And I've found it to be a pretty fascinating. It's a very expensive sport, like you're really kind of diving into, but it's pretty cool. And a lot of Marines are that way about it. So like it's not uncommon for like my friends to have like fucking 20 guns. Like, I don't know, just like it's like not a uncommon thing, and it's funny to hear about you guys just not having like the access to it. It just seems very so opposite, so different.
Yeah, we're big here on. There's lots of stuff that people people don't like, man. There's certain things here like that you can't even like certain. Uh, it was like one of my housemate was saying the other day on, or it might have been yeah. My brother, we were in the car together, and he has like a four-wheel drive. I don't know what you guys. It's just like a big car sort of thing. You guys have way bigger cars there. He has like there's like a light on the front of it, that kind of like I can't think of the name, but there's certain lights that he's not allowed on the front of his car because they're like too bright and
Yeah,
shit like that. And so I just
yeah,
feel like America
yeah.
seems to be the total opposite. But like the so can I ask you what gun you have? Is that like a personal question?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Dude, that's the thing too. Is like I'm so not into them. I think it's a Springfield XDS. That's what I have. And then yeah, as far as the carbines, I I don't have a carbine like rifle or anything like personally owned, but I have access to a few different ones if I ever needed, and I have no idea what those are. And that's the thing too about it is like people know exactly the manufacturers that are the best manufacturers and the bullets that are, but that's just not something I've dove into. I think it's cool. I just have never had the time or interest in like getting into it. But you put a rifle in front of me and a target, like I definitely love shooting and like I'd love to go around and shoot some things, stuff like that. So not really my forte.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I feel like it just would have been a different experience as well when you were learning them. But I mean, in Michigan, you still can't carry, right? You still can't carry it around with you.
You You can not a rifle. I mean, you can have it in your vehicle. I believe there are a lot of interesting laws surrounding it, and it varies state by state. But as far as a pistol, you have to have a concealed carry license. So it's just have a license to conceal it. I don't think Michigan's an open carry state. I could be wrong. But yeah, there's open carry states where you can just as long as you can see it, like it's legal to just carry it around in your hip pocket, like the Wild West.
Yeah, well, we always joke about it here because, like, I know that you guys have like ammunition stores or gun stores and like that. But can you guys? I don't know if this was just some bullshit, but I'm pretty sure that there is places where you can do it. Can you guys buy guns at like Walmart?
Yeah. Yeah, you
You
can. You can go into like yeah, you can go into like a Walmart type store and buy a gun. I mean, you're gonna have to pass a background check and whatnot. Like it's like a couple of hoops you jump through, but it's a little too easy.
Yeah, Jesus, that's we joke about it here because we don't think it's real, and it's like what that's crazy. Um, one more thing on that. When you were in like the Marine Corps, or so over here, I imagine it's a lot softer. They probably get to play with some stuff, but probably not a lot, considering how relaxed you guys already are. I'm curious as to how far it got in terms of like obviously you were shooting rifles and things like that, and maybe did you ever get to shoot like a 50 cal or something cool like that?
Yeah. If you want me to send you some videos later, I definitely will. 50 cal is an awesome gun to shoot. We get set up on a range at the basic school, and you're in this like essentially this big canyon type thing, but you can see for a mile, and you get these tracer rounds and these bullets, and these bullets are this big, right? They're just like 6 inches, whatever, 8 inches, whatever. It's just like you can see the tracer rounds go for a mile and hit the target. So it's just, like those some of these weapon systems are like pretty insane. I mean, we also get to shoot they're called Miclics, so essentially just like packages of C4 that get they get like tied up together in like a snake, and you get like maybe 100 feet, maybe more or less, somewhere in there, of just C4 that just gets shot out by like a rocket. And that what that does is you get a line of C4 that's supposed to just essentially it blows up, and then it's supposed to pave a path for you in any sort of like minefield situation. So if you're facing IEDs and stuff like that, you can do that and then be sure that that route is like clear. So we got to shoot those off. As an engineer, like we were blowing stuff up a lot, so a lot of C4, TNT, and stuff like that was pretty common in my job. For other weapon systems, I mean, like M240s are like a machine gun. Those are pretty cool. It's got like chain link, like I mean, that's like what you see like Arnold Schwarzenegger with, like a big machine gun.
Yeah,
And
wow. That's
240,
so you did you
249, something like that.
did you ever use like a hand grenade, like a live hand grenade?
Yeah, we had to get trained on hand grenades. And then, usually in like these practice situations, you'd have these, they're called blue bodies. So you just refill them with like a glorified firecracker, to simulate like a grenade going off, something like that. Do flashbangs, done flashbangs. CS gas fucking sucks. It's like maybe one of my least favorites.
So you have to
Shot.
experience it.
Oh yeah. You have to get trained on the gas mask and stuff like that, and like inevitably you end up inhaling a lot of it. I mean, like there were a couple exercises in the basic school where we'd be out in the woods. You'd like dig into a spot like this, kind of like just dig in your hole and stuff like that, and you'd be just like waiting. It's called playing the defense. Um, and then you just get gassed out of nowhere. I mean, I had some traumatic experiences where I couldn't get my gas mask working, and you're just like, you're just drooling all over yourself, hacking up a lung, and just like you're trying to get your gas mask on, and then you have to like clear it, and then you have to breathe through it really heavy and stuff like that. So um, that's part of it. Yeah, you got to get good at doing that.
Wow. Was there any weapons that you used that made you nervous? Was there anything that you did, in maybe explosives or weapons or anything that you didn't enjoy, like that they made you nervous to hold them or use them?
It's always weird holding the grenade, regardless. Just like I hope this thing works. you know, I definitely felt that way with the grenades. Everything else, pretty a lot of safeties built into the way that we train. I think if I would have had more, if I would have ever got like an actual combat situation, I think maybe I would have learned a little bit more about that kind of stuff and like how things, when they don't have like the safeties that are built in with training, um, maybe it would have been a little more interesting. But yeah, nothing too crazy. I mean, riding in some of the vehicles that the Marine Corps has, like, so a lot of it's old and stuff like that. It's always a little sketchy. So the old Humvees and the old 7 tons and stuff like that are pretty sketchy sometimes. I've ridden in Osprey. I don't know if you'd ever seen one of those. They're like these um, tilt rotor like helicopter. They're kind of like half helicopter, half plane things. They're like pretty cool looking. The MV-222s and stuff like that but they're kind of fucking scary to ride in. I feel like you're gonna die.
Yeah, okay.
So
That's I guess that's me trying to like paint that picture in my head of what it's really like, right? Because it's like I like fucking watch like Hacksaw Ridge, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's do you get that's the and this will be the last one because I'm kind of nerding out on it. But do you get spoken to like shit? That's probably one of the main ones I'm that curious about. Like I'm sure they're probably pretty vocal and they yell and that, but do you get spoken to like real badly as well? Do they insult you and shit? Like,
yeah. So in officer candidate school, yeah, for sure. When you're going through training, and then like also like kind of try to teach you about the difference between officer and enlisted. Like you go on as an officer with a college degree, and you kind of like taking responsibility legally for anything that your enlisted Marines do. Which, if you know anything about enlisted, and then add that they're Marines, it's even they're like you know most of them are like feral cats. Like there's a lot of good Marines, but then there's like especially young Marines that just like they're wild. They're like the wildest type. They're just like I don't really know how to explain them, but enlisted Marines have like a stereotype about them, and so like you're taking responsibility for them. So as you get through the basic training and you get into kind of like the greater Marine Corps, we call it the fleet. Officers always get a lot of respect. As an O1, the lowest ranking officer, you maybe kind of get shit on a few times, like by higher officers. But for me, for whatever reason, like I think I kind of had like the jujitsu fighter thing going on. I just like kind of did my own thing. I never really got like ripped into too much after OCS. Like I definitely saw some officers kind of get ripped into. It's definitely a thing. Enlisted get ripped into all the time. That's like essentially the culture. Like that's you talk about Jarhead. That's probably a pretty good, accurate movie for how the Marine Corps was maybe back in like the 80s, 90s. And it's hasn't changed too much. It's shitty living conditions. Like they're all addicted to vapes and nicotine and Rippets and bang energy drinks and porn and who knows what else. It's just like they're just addicted to everything, and it's like they're getting yelled at anytime they do something stupid, which is like every 5 seconds. So.
It's painted such a
Definitely a
different
lot of
picture
yelling.
now. It's just, I just almost want to like caption that as part of this podcast, like vaping, bang energy drinks, and porn. Like that sounds like a horrendous mix to me personally. But I mean, I guess some people are happy with it. That's that's
I
an
think they do it on purpose. Yeah, we were talking before about autism and steroids being like the key to making world champions in jiu-jitsu. It's like the Marine Corps. I think they got it down to a science. It's like keep the young Marines fed with bang energy drinks, nicotine, and porn, coop them up, and they'll do whatever you tell them to do.
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting mix. I mean, funnily, here's another thing before we move on as well, because we talked about the laws with Australia. You might find this funny because they've just made it illegal here. So they've just made it they've just banned importation of anything vaping related, and they're gonna like ban the sale of it in like a couple of months. So like vaping will be like completely illegal in Australia. So no one's having bang energy and vaping here and watching porn because you can't do it. You can still have your bang energy and watch porn, but I feel like you'd be missing something. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think I respect the try, but like just like anything that gets like forbidden, it's just like it's gonna be it's just the underground gets so much more unregulated and whatever.
yeah, we've all been saying that too. It's just gonna get worse probably. Who knows what people will be inhaling soon. But I wanted to ask about because we're kind of not that this is in that direction, but we're speaking about a few interesting experiences here, and we brought up before when we were talking, and I've been really curious since you said it. You talked about ayahuasca, and I'm super curious to hear about that because that's another thing that doesn't seem to be as popular here. Some people seem to be into DMT here, but I don't know how like regulated that would be, and I definitely probably wouldn't try any from some random dude at like a nightclub. I feel like that would be pretty bad. But over in America, you guys seem to have way more access to like really out there psychedelic drugs and shit. So tell me a little bit about maybe your experience with that or your plan to.
Yeah, for sure. So I know like within the states, like yeah, there's probably some like there's loopholes like churches will like kind of be able to get away with where you can do ayahuasca ceremonies. Maybe here in the States, I know that there's some things you can do in like Native American churches with like peyote and stuff like that. I don't know too much about it. I've always been interested in ayahuasca since college. I was like listening to Joe Rogan and Aubrey Marcus and stuff like that. And like I was really interested in fighting and I was really interested in the mind and I was studying psychology and there's always been like a fascination with psychedelics as far as like using it in a therapeutic and like beneficial way. Um, Never been much of like a party drug like enthusiast with that kind of stuff. I think it's very interesting. I think that they're very cool things, but I was always like kind of looking at MDMA for PTSD, and I was writing papers in college on psilocybin for PTSD, and just like really fascinated with these like the success like some of these psychedelic drugs were having. And then when I got into the Marine Corps, it just kind of like made even more sense as I was like making friends with both my best friends from the Marine Corps and my neighbors. It just like happened this way that they were um, MARSOC, Marine Special Operations, guys, and they're just like these badass, cool dudes, and they're just really open minded and stuff. And so, like, we'd have all these conversations about, where these drugs and these substances can maybe fit into like a holistic the holistic picture and stuff. So I'm really performance based. I'm really interested in increasing my performance, and I think a lot of that and I think I learned this from wrestling, but I think a lot of that always like starts in your brain, in your mind. And I think we need to like kind of look at where we place limitations on ourselves mentally, and that's really emotionally. um I think as men, I think that's a specific type of challenge. I think it's a especially difficult one for men, to sort of like go back up and through and like figure out what's holding you down and whatnot. So kind of like attacking those things. Been attacking those things for a while, and I just I wasn't really looking at it too closely while I was in the Marine Corps. I was doing a few things. I was in the Marine Corps that maybe I'll save for a later podcast. I'll save my battalion commander from. Maybe I'll wait until he retires before I tell some of these stories. He doesn't get in trouble. Not that he knew anything that I was doing, but I was like, kind of like towing the line. Had some gray areas while that last like year and a half in the Marine Corps. So, um, but kind of like kept my interest and curiosity up with psychedelics and stuff like that. And when I got out, I got connected with this group called Becoming Ohm, and it was because they were helping out veterans. They were doing like a microdosing mushroom jujitsu retreat. And I was like, all right, mushrooms, jujitsu sounds right up my alley. The way I was introduced to these people were cool. And so like I had the money and I invested in it. And so I went out to Tulum in October, and there was no real intense psychedelic experience there, but it was, microdose, do jujitsu, love that, been doing that for a long time. There was some like ganja yoga, so like, just being really intentional in ceremony, and like, you're smoking some cannabis and then you're, doing yoga, and actually had a pretty intense experience doing that. There was a sweat lodge, we call it a temescal. It was like putting these like volcanic rocks in this like little rock dome, and we packed that rock dome. It was like full with like 10 people. It was just like, you're right next to them, and you're just like sitting on this uncomfortable rock surface, and you're just like hot as fuck for like over an hour. It's like they they essentially they call it the mother's womb, because you go in there to like rebirth or whatever, and it's like, yeah, I definitely fucking died in that thing. Like like I've been in saunas before, and I had some traumatic flashbacks to like times that I got real close to death in college, like cutting weight and stuff like that. It was like pretty intense. So that was maybe one of the more intense experience, was the sweat lodge. um but again, like, very intentional, very much connected to nature, very much connected to ceremony, and with these people that I'm like getting to know and like love and stuff. And then after, we just get this awesome experience where we get to like swim in these cenotes, or like these underground cave pools, just like right on the little retreat center that we're at. It's just awesome. Like, I don't really know how else to say it. It's just like you're meeting cool people, and you're healing, and you're focusing on healing. And I mean, at the time for me, it was really powerful because I had just like separated with my ex-wife, and we had been together for 13 years, and it was like it was a pretty powerful one for me. Like, I knew that that was kind of what I was going to have to be facing and like dealing with, and figuring out and stuff like that. And so like I feel like it was a really good step in the right direction. And there's going to be a lifetime of kind of like working through and healing with stuff like with that specifically. But it was like a good thing for me, to like put me on the path. And that leads to same group. I'm going to Peru in June to do ayahuasca. And it's, not really, it's a small group. It's not something that it's not like this commercialized setting. It's, we're not going to any hotel or anything like that, or like it's not like this mass produced thing. It's like a group of 10 of us going to this village in Palcupa, Peru. And we're going out there. We're going to make the medicine with the, I guess they're the tribe elders, the shamans. It's like a lot that I have yet to learn, but can just go get really like down and dirty in Peru, and I don't know, it's like this mysterious thing, but it's like this like type of fear that I'm like used to with jujitsu, that it's like, yeah, I'm terrified of what could happen, but it's the type of fear that I'm like, I know this is going to be good, and regardless of the outcome, like whatever worst case scenario is, even still, like you're still learning. So I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited for all that.
Yeah, wow, man. That's I feel like when sometimes when people talk about something, you think of your to-do list and then you hear theirs and you're like, fuck, I gotta get out more. Like I gotta yeah, that sounds like you got like some really cool shit that's gonna happen, and like it's gonna be super unique experience, and it sounds wild. Um
Or I could get like eaten by a jaguar, like I just like wander off into the jungle, and that's a great way to die, though. I mean, like, let's be honest.
yeah, I mean, I feel like that would only come from like a fairly like kind of strong, like gun ho American like yourself. Like we're pussies here, man. We're like, oh my god, that sounds terrible. That's why it's funny. Everybody thinks Australia is like scary because of the animals we have. I would fucking much rather what we have here than what you guys have. Like we have like snakes and spiders and shit like that, but like you guys have like bears and like real hectic shit. And
Oh, bears are the best part. Bears are the best part. It's the tigers. It's the tigers in Texas. There's more tigers in Texas than there are in like Africa.
I did not know that. Really,
Yeah,
that's
apparently, allegedly.
that's great. What do you have in like Michigan? Like what's like what's common there?
Bears, yeah, bears are big. You got coyotes, wolves. Nothing too wild. I mean, you get like mountain lions and stuff like cougars and stuff like that are around. Up in the UP, you get a lot of moose. Moose is big. Bears are bigger up in the UP is like a couple hours north of me, where it's like technically like it's not Canada, but it's like as close as you can get to Canada. It's like that type of just spread out woodlands and stuff like that. It's a lot of like wolves and stuff up there.
I love that you just said it's not that wild and then listed like five of the fucking wildest animals. Like you say like wolves and coyotes and bears and cougars and shit. We're like Australians, we're like, fuck that. They're all shit that'll tear you up. And they all like cougars and that, man, like they're gonna move quick. Like it's not gonna be a good time. But I mean, at the same time, man, it sounds like it's gonna be like a crazy unique experience. So I hope that's good for you. I mean, and this has been a great podcast so far. I hope we can speak again in the future, maybe in a bit of time, and then maybe I can be the one that you share those stories from the Marine Corps with, but then also maybe you can also then tell us how this experience goes, and assuming you survive the Jaguars and things
Yeah,
like that.
hell yeah,
Um,
let's plan on it. That sounds good. I'm gonna
for,
need to unpack it, I'm sure.
yeah, it's what, dude. And you're welcome to do it here because I'm gonna have so many questions. Or I can just listen, but we mentioned this before, and so it's something that we want to. I feel like once again we're talking. We could do it forever. I do have work in half an hour, which so we're going to fit a little bit more in before we finish. And I just want to retouch on appreciating you being here again. And this is always such a unique experience. I think a lot of what I want to do is I want to travel as well. I definitely want to do more traveling, but I love the fact that if you're going to look at technology and has many downfalls, but I love that this can be a thing now that you can be immediately connected to someone else and hear all these unique experiences. It makes, I guess it makes me feel more ambitious when it comes to the podcast because everyone can have a podcast these days where to me, I'm really interested in trying to like speak to people who are from somewhere that's just completely different than where I am. And Perth is like so small as well. Like, it's really
Yeah.
cool. Um, I wanted to touch on it because we spoke before about it. We're obviously talking about things like ayahuasca and other different experiences with the drugs and stuff. So when it comes to wrestling and BJJ, there's obviously there's quite a difference there. It's not one that I'm that educated on, so I'd like you to maybe touch on that, but then also maybe to put it into perspective, just when it comes to things like performance enhancers and stuff that people use. Obviously, jujitsu it's a little bit more common, and then in wrestling it sort of isn't. Um, for me, it's kind of wild because I don't always really know. And there's been a couple of people that I've rolled with and stuff, and then I've spoken to someone afterwards, and then they've kind of been like, "Oh yeah, no, like I'm on testosterone or I do something or whatever," and I'm like, "Oh okay, wow, like I wouldn't have picked it, I guess, because I'm so used to bodybuilding and powerlifting, where like it's not always about how someone looks, but sometimes it's very obvious." And
Yeah.
so it's kind of, I don't know what it's like in America and how common it is in like groups of people that do jujitsu, but then obviously wrestling is an Olympic sport, and then so it's tested, and there's a lot of different stuff there. So I guess maybe you could just explain a little bit about your experience wrestling and where you're planning on sort of going with it, but why it's different than the jujitsu stuff, and then maybe just like on maybe your thoughts on just like drugs in the sport and like how they affect it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think wrestling is very unique in that the way you kind of get brought up is like this hard nosed and kind of like just work, 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 work. You kind of tap into like these natural steroids, right? Like just based on like how hard you work and the way that you recover, all this stuff. And I think wrestling, as you try to like get into the senior level and stuff like that, like it's an Olympic sport and that's like the highest you can go on it. It's like just makes more sense for wrestlers to kind of just go like the natural performance enhancing route. And that's kind of what I've seen, and that's kind of like the. I also think it's like a really cool part of the sport where it's like very pure. I love wrestling so much because it's so part of like my base, like my home, like where I come from, like my story. It's just like I was just around wrestling, and like there's people that lived it even more hardcore than me, and but it's just like something that you have in common with people. It's something that I share with like my dad. It's something I share with like my friends, my athletes and stuff like that. It's just like a really cool sport, and that's like part of it. Like when you get up to the top, like yeah, there's athletes are always going to try to find an advantage, and rules, all is fair in love and war. Like a lot of these people think of this as like war, it's like, or they're, they love it so much that it's like they're going to do whatever it takes type thing. So I think every sport has that element to it, but I think wrestling, I think being an Olympic sport, not going to see it as much. You're not going to see as much doping and whatnot. It's just because it's just you get banned and then that you're out. It's just not very smart to do. On the jujitsu side of things, like ADCCs, maybe IBJJF is another organization that's pretty big. I don't know how into the organizations you are, but IBJJF is like a tested sport, but it's kind of like a joke. It's like you kind of know when they're going to be there, and they only test a few people, and so just like everybody typically the understanding is that everybody juices in jujitsu or everybody is on something in jujitsu. And I would say that's probably generally pretty true. And I think being somebody that's been into performance enhancing, like my perspective, it's like you have to be able to do all the fundamental things that we were talking about earlier. The diet, the having that locked in for yourself, having the recovery locked in for yourself, having your strength training down just right, and then you kind of like it's a progression. You see what else works for you. So like for me, I'm pretty open with my main sport being jujitsu, and like my goals being set in sort of like the submission fighting ADCC realm. It's like I'm very interested in like uh, the actual sort of like science behind it. And like for me, if I'm ever like dabbling in that side of things, it's always a minimum effective dose mentality. Whereas like something I've learned from like bigger guys like Derek from More Plates More Dates or something like that. Like there's some really good information out there on how to approach these things, and I think it's definitely worth studying up on like these these drugs out there. It's just like it's frightening. Like they're it's very scary. Like what's out there, and it's like if it's illegal and people are interested in doing it, then it's like where we talk about with the vapes. Like people are gonna find their way to those drugs, and then you just get something that's like more unknown, more unsecure. Of like you don't know who's manufacturing, you don't know what's actually in it, and all that stuff. So it's like pretty unsafe. So like I don't know, I'm like open to that world and that conversation. I think it's important because you think about longevity, you think about just like overall like quality of life stuff. It's like healthcare is so personal, and health in general is so personal. And like I get that it gets tied to competing and whatnot. And there's always going to be the conversation of unfair advantage. There's always going to be the conversations of fairness, and your health is on the line, especially in combat sports. So like I'm up to date on like all those conversations. I think they're all worth having, and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's just like I mean, I'm glad you brought it up. It's just like a good, interesting topic to kind of like dive into. Um and yeah, I think for me it's more on that like personal side of just like figuring out like exactly how much I don't want to like um put forward and share. It's like there's some gray areas in there.
Yeah, yeah, it's just interesting in terms of like the the differences between them as well. Because like I said, wrestling's really not a thing here, at least as I'm aware. And then like we grew up watching movies and that, and guys have like the headgear on, and you're in like you've got like a soft suit on, and there's sort of like you're wrestling in like a high school gymnasium. Like that's like so foreign to us. Like we're like, what's going on there? And then I guess like I don't know, maybe you guys would use this kind of like roughhousing term. Like it's lots of roughhousing. Like people like doing. You guys probably do it like when you're younger, just with your mates and shit. Like people are kind of pussies here. I feel like they're getting better, but I grew up around like a lot of mates. So like yeah, we weren't doing shit like that. Like you know what I mean. And some people probably were, but I feel like it's just becoming a little bit more maybe popular to sort of be involved in some kind of contact sport or some kind of like combat sport. And so for me, like doing the jujitsu is actually really good mentally for me because it's just it bridges like a gap that I have between like myself for like human contact, and like it puts me in situations where it's quite stressful, and I get like a lot of weight and pressure on me, and I like that. I typically get picked by a lot of the bigger guys. I'm not that big. Um, I don't know how to put it in your scale. I'd be maybe like 215 pounds, but that's like
Yeah.
I'm like cutting at the moment. So I'm like, to me, I'm like really skinny, but I've been like 230, 240, and I'm maybe like 6'2". So like I can't really pick the smaller guys because then people are like, oh, who's this guy picking the smaller guy? So I generally will I roll with maybe dudes who are like sometimes like 120 kilos. I don't know what that is. I think that's like 250, 260. And
Yeah.
I get sat on a lot, and like they're kind of, I'm getting squished and stuff, but I sort of like it. I sort of like it. Sort of does something for me. I think from like a hormone perspective, it sort of releases something, and I always feel good afterwards. So I would like to do a little bit more of it, but there's that kind of interest of that, but then there's also the takedown side of things, which I guess I kind of wanted to ask briefly about because once we had spoken and then I'd looked at a little bit of what you were doing. I've been trying to find the video since. I'm not sure where I saw it, but I saw you do a suplex, like
Yeah.
quite a serious one too. Like you seem to. I found an older video of you when you were younger performing one, and then it sort of wasn't. Obviously, you were really young, and so you hadn't sort of you did it kind of okay, but not it sort of didn't land properly. But then this video that I saw must have been more recent, and it looked like you. I'm assuming the suplex it'd be probably too hard to break down from like a technical perspective, but I imagine there's like a perfect amount of like leveraging yourself so that you can kind of slingshot people over you properly, and there's probably a lot to it. But to me, it seems terrifying. Like I'm like that. It seems like such a crazy way to like possibly hurt someone. And
Yeah.
recently, I don't know if you saw it. I don't know if it was a big thing over in America. It just came up on my Instagram, but there was a reel that came out about some guy that it looked like someone kind of did a suplex type movement, and there was a guy who landed on his neck, and I think he became like a
Yeah.
quadriplegic. And
Thanks.
so that sort of shit scares us. But like the suplex, is it considered like, is it just to you? Is that just like, nah, it's wrestling, or is it still considered like a risky move?
Oh no, yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, yeah, the suplex is very like a mysterious thing. No, it's definitely just like another thing. I think landing on someone's neck would just be, I mean, having somebody land on the neck, you just did it wrong. You did it improperly, and you should have been hitting it. I think.
Yeah.
There's like a special like amount or certain amount of like back arch and um it's like a very, very much like a deadlift movement where you're getting your hips up and under, and you're popping your hips through, and then you're back arching, and then you follow it through. And the follow through is, honestly, where a lot of people fail, is they just like they're halfway through the back arch, and then they kind of like freak out and let go, and then it just kind of gets weird. Whereas you just follow it all the way through, and then you'll kind of just land back on, kind of like back in good position. But yeah, the one that you're talking about is, it was last October, is the ADCC East Coast Trials, and I was going against a guy. It was kind of a legend in the sport. He's a little bit older. He's like 40s, and his name's Aaron Jansen. He fought for two Bellator world titles, and so I was just like I knew stepping up to like fight this guy. I was like, I didn't know who he was at the time, but I was like, oh, this dude, like, this dude's a real deal. And so it's like respect right away. And we just had this dog fight, and we ended up going into overtime, 0-0, and like I took him down, so it was up to nothing or something like that. And then the suplex was just like what broke him, and like it's like you feel something in matches, like when people are just like mentally, they're just like and there was only like 30 seconds left, and so it was just like that was like actually a very important move for me to hit at that moment, because it was like, okay, I just got the highlight reel, but I also like I put the finishing touch on, like, no, I'm not I'm not giving this up. You're done. So it was like kind of like that mental advantage too there.
Yeah, it seemed really intense, and I don't know if you could. I'm keen to see some of these shooting videos you talked about and stuff like that as well. I don't know if you could get that suplex video to me. I really struggled to find it because I was trying to
Yeah.
explain it to someone, and I was trying to show them. I was like, oh man, this I've seen people do it, but that specific one and just the angle it was filmed from, it was just a really good example from what I'd seen anyway. You seemed like you executed it quite well. Um, for me, like I said, it's wild to us because I don't see people doing that. Even the jiu-jitsu gym that
Yeah.
I'm at, like some people do takedowns, but generally they'll be like leg ones and stuff like that.
Yeah. My big thing is like those suplexes, like basically a backwards bear hug. But then like a lot of my game is like getting my arms around the body and pulling and bear hugging in, getting underhooks and stuff like that. So just kind of like pretty natural for me. But yeah, I'll kind of like go through my phone and send you some cool videos for sure.
I'm keen. I'll be at work for the next 4 hours, and I'll just be there with my housemate, and we can just like watch him and talk shit. It's cool, man. I love it. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
Man, look, thank you very much for being here today. And I absolutely can see, very much like with Will, as we spoke about before recently, when I kind of click with someone and we can have a really good chat for a long period of time, it's always gets to a point where I always feel like we run out of time. So I'm really look forward
Yeah.
to speaking to you again in the future. And I appreciate like you sharing a lot of these experiences with me and people listening. Um, if you want to, if you have been listening and enjoying this podcast, you could find Jared at is it Fekete JJ. Did I say that right this time?
Yeah.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
On Instagram, or Sleeping Bear BJJ is like your brand, and your is that your like coaching brand as well?
Yeah, so it's right now we're just like we had a gym this summer and stuff like that, and we kind of like went a different route. And just my brand now, Free Bear Hugs, and it's sort of like a liaison for jiu-jitsu in the northern Michigan area right now. Just like I know where all the jiu-jitsu is, so if people hit me up, like I know where to get them places.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic. And so, would you ever, I guess lastly, do you ever think you'll come to Australia? Australia, sorry.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I mean, I was in Abu Dhabi in January. That's something we didn't get to talk about, but yeah, I was coaching some jiu-jitsu matches in Abu Dhabi, and like if I get a chance to come out to Australia, yeah, I would love to. Yeah, absolutely. And for you too, man. If you're ever in the States, you want to make a trip or plan some trips, plan to come up to Michigan. Oh yeah,
Oh man,
be
I'd
cool.
love to. I think that's my like all time thing. Like my all time like if I'm going to go somewhere, it's going to be America. But the biggest thing for me is I've really got to be able to schedule a time where it's like I've
Yeah,
spoken to people and they're like, if you're going to go there, it needs to be like a month minimum.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that'd be
That's a
great.
good
That'd
plan.
really be wicked. My plan would be, and something I've always thought about is if I could, I would get to a point where maybe I would come over and I just want to hire like a motorhome and I could just
Yeah,
podcast, man, and just do something like that. And so it'd be
that's the thing.
really, yeah, awesome.
That's the thing. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of companies that do that kind of stuff. You could get it figured out for sure.
Yeah, awesome, man. That'd be great. Well, look, man, like I said, if you guys have been listening, you can go and follow Jared at both of his pages, and I hope that they enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. I definitely did, and once again, man, just thank you so much for your time. I'll give a shout out to you, and then obviously all of our sponsors as well, and a shout out to my mother, as I always do. And is there
Yeah,
anyone you would like to mention?
I'll shout out to my mom as well.
There we
Hey,
go.
mom.
It's always nice to do that. Thank you again. And man, I'm looking forward to speaking again soon. Enjoy the ayahuasca and
Yeah,
we will revisit it one day.
yeah, bro. Let's stay in touch for sure.
Thanks, man.